Thank you, Ariel. In order to introduce my next speaker, our next speaker, I just want to tell you for 1 second that there's a link set. There's a pasuk in this week's parsha that we just read, we learned today. Actually, everybody knows the story of Yosef with Potiphar's wife, that he was able to control himself and run out of the house. And Rashi brings a beautiful medrash that says that how did Yosef able to basically overcome this amazing challenge? And the answer Rashi brings is a chazal that say, T'mut yukno shel aviv. He saw an image of his father. He saw Yaakov Avinu, and Yosef was able to basically rally and run out. Shlomo Carlebach, who my father always used to like to speak about, Shlomo Carlebach actually explains a little bit differently. He says he didn't see an image of his father. What Yosef saw was T'mut yukno shel aviv. He saw himself as a father. Yosef saw himself that he knew he'd be a father one day, and he said, if I'm going to be a father and I have to be a role model to my own children, I cannot do such a terrible thing like this. And that was what was able to get Yosef to overcome this terrible challenge he had. I feel my father was like that as well. My father had that inner sense of doing what was right all the time, and he knew how to act among his 3 children such that hopefully we keep that within us. He always knew to do the right thing and never do the wrong thing. I'm looking right now at one of our father's closest friends, son of a father's closest friend. Erwin Mell was my father's closest friend, or one of them, along with Bell Holtauer and other folks who were here. Too many of them to mention. But I'm looking at Jeffrey Mell, and I remember sitting around the table all the time, and I would always be arguing with your father, Jeffrey, about if I drive in New Jersey, where I used to work, and I have to pick up gas at a gas station, and I live in New York, do I have to pay tax on the gas that I'm buying in New Jersey, because the tax rate in New York is higher, and really under the law, you actually have to pay the tax of the state that you live in, not the state where you pick up the stuff. And your father would scream at me and say, what are you, an idiot? Why would you even think to do such a thing? And I realized, you know why I thought to do such a thing? Because my father taught me that. He didn't teach it to me in that incident, but he taught it because that was his way of living. He lived a life of honesty and truth in everything. And if there's one person who embodies that among all of us, it's my brother Ari. My brother Ari, with his 6 beautiful children, embodies that Ani Yosef. He knows what it is to be a father. He knows how to be a role model to 2 of his children that are here, and of course 4 that are in America with his lovely wife Susie. Without further ado, my brother Ari Israel.
You all for coming tonight. Yesterday morning, when we had the unveiling at Beis HaKfaros in Har Menuchos, shared the pasuk that we use for Mishlei, and the kever for my dad is very simple. So my dad was a simple man, and it has 3 words from Mishlei: V'dover Yisharim Ya'av. Those who speak, Yisharim. Those Yashar. David just shared a story. Yahav, shall be loved. It encapsulates my entire dad, and I can probably sit down right now, save us a little bit of time, save me some angst. But I believe that was my father's life in 3 simple words: speaking Yashrus and being loved. And when I was preparing for the unveiling yesterday, my dad loved a good gematria. And my son picked up, both lefties actually somehow, skipped a generation, I guess that's what it does, and gematrias would be the same. The gematria of the Dover Yisharim Yahav equals Chaimale Limud Torah. And I believe as well, Yahav in gematria is 18, and Chai. And that my dad was alive with learning of Limud Torah every day of his life, in shul, walking home from shul, after shul. He always had a sefer in his hand. His Torah Tamima, which I now own, or his Hebrew Dapim on the Daf Yomi, well before Art Scroll became fashionable. My father used to sit every morning after Shachars with Dial Daf to learn. And he plugged away morning after morning, Kovea Itim LaTorah, attending 3 Gemara Shiurim every single week, in addition to the Daf and his own weekly Chavrusa. And that's when he was working as a computer programmer sometimes holding 3 jobs down to support our family. But Torah always was a part. And alas, when he retired, as Adina spoke about earlier, became a Magid Shir for Senior Kollel, Young Israel Shomrei Emunah. And then when my parents made Aliyah, he joined the Kollel here in Yerushalayim. Because for him, Chai Malei Limud Torah. The last Gemara my father was learning, which was the inside of the trunk of his car as he drove to shul that morning and then fell, was Gemara Yoma. I remember David learning that with that same Gemara in the ICU in Suburban Hospital. And then I took up the charge and plowed through that Masechta to complete where my dad left off. I had the privilege to learn several daf with my son Daniel, who's now learning in Eretz Yisrael for a 2nd year. And a chilling moment one day, when flipping through the daf and the actual Gemara that my father used, I came across his paper clip for the last daf he ever learned. And one sugya in the Gemara has a great line from Rav Yirmiyah critiquing his chaverim as Bavloyim Tipshim, foolish Babylonians. Why? Because they gave a klutz answer. And so they tried a different approach. And then Rava, who was also a Bavloi, says, Amrle Rava ad hashta karolin Tipshin. With that answer, before we were called Tipshin, Vahashta Tipshoi Tipshoi. That's even worse than the first answer. And we're going to be doubly called fools. That was my dad as well, who did not tolerate a klutz shaila, or certainly not a klutz answer. And that's the Gemara that he was learning. But he always loved the good pshetel. I want to share for a moment from the Gemara in Yom Shol Talmidav es Reb Shimon Bar Yochai mipnei ma lo yared lahem Yisrael man pamachas b'shana. Why didn't the man fall down just once a year? Wouldn't it have been easy? Why do we need a miracle every day of the year? And the Gemara gives 3 reasons why the man had to fall down on a daily basis. The first is if someone has a child, if you give the child a check, here's a check, come back in a year from now, we'll pay you off. What would that child do? We'd only see that child once a year. But if the child gets a check every single day, makbil pnei aviv, kulam mischavim libam lavim shebashamayim. We should daven to God on a daily basis. Gemara also answers davar achar she'aya ochlan asok sheyucham. God wants us to have warm bread. Why should it be cold and stale after 354 days? And davar achar, the last answer, masoy haderech. God didn't want us to have to carry so much, but rather each day was a unique opportunity. I think these 3 answers encapsulate my father as well. The first, to daven to God. I remember as a child of 4 or 5, almost every day attending the upstairs base medrash in Shomrei Emunah, to daven with him and Rabbi Einmer and Holocaust survivors, being in shul on a regular basis. That was my father, who learned and davened and attended shul, even as a balabas. Second, cham, of warmth. Dad shared not so much through words alone, but more by actions. Taking us to Redskins games on a cold Sunday with our hot cocoa thermos, eating lunch indoors on the radiator. That warmth of spending time with my father, if the Redskins were winning at least. And the burden to not to carry too much. I believe, and after finishing Avelis just today, Avelis in mourning cannot be a burden carried alone. We were supportive of a family with Mom and David and Rachel and Susie and Ariel and all the grandkids and everyone else who supported me as well, because like the man, it can't be done in one shot, but has to be done on a daily basis. And being part of a minyan, the halacha demands to say Kaddish. Connecting through God through tefillah on a daily basis is a constant that develops the kesher and reinforces our religious journey as expressed through Kaddish. Every minyan, every day, every responsibility, day in and day out, to thank God. I'd like to now have a siyum on the Masechta and then finish my remarks before the final Kaddish. Hadran alach Maseches Yoma v'Hadra Chalan, Daita alach Maseches Yoma v'Daita Chalan. Lo nisnashi minon Maseches Yoma v'Nisnashi minon v'Amadein v'Lo Amidasi. Yiratzon Fanecha Adar Leim Leo Sinish Torascha Manasev Olam Azasi Oman Olam Abba. Chanina Bar Papa, Rami Bar Papa, Nachman Bar Papa, Chai Bar Papa, Mari Bar Papa, Rafim Bar Papa, Rachish Bar Papa, Surcha Bar Papa, Ada Bar Papa, Dara Bar Papa. Herab Nad and Arlene Restoration, Sefel Fino Fisum, Chabes Israel, Nachman Kolenu, Kolanu Anachman, Tesinim Sem Chabes Israel, Kolanu De Shmechel Nesor Sechem, Evaisa Klenisum, Sosech Lam Hili. Yulivisa Mim Bechokach Laman Levosh, Laman Lolam, Loshkach Bukadecha, Kivam Kisani, Ruchato Adonai Lam Deni Chukecha, Amen, 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 Sela, Vaed. وديما ناخذ فناخذ دار لين بلا وسنش سلام خلقين بيوش بيس امرش وسام خلقين بيوش كرونوس شانو مشكيم اي مشكيم انا مشكيم لبير بسورة اي مشكيم لبير بتيلم انا ميل من ميل كام سخار ميل من كاب سخار انا راتن اي راتن من راتن خيال ما باب اي راتن لبير شاخش نمر بتالهم صار ديمز بير شاخس عن شي دم ميرو لا يخص في ميل من يفتح باخ يرسم فناخذ دار لهاي شيمش دارن سيم مسخس يوم كين تاجين لهاسك مسخس صفر مخيرم وسايمون ولا لا من الشمر بلاستس كايمس كولد ريسورس تمام صار تخ بيعفا وسخوز كول تنايف رايم سامنيس قام ان يوم ليو زاري شلو سامش تور بي بزاري بزار زاري بعدولام سكايمي لخص تام خصاب بشفل تشمر لخ باقي سوسي هيسي سخخ كبير من مخ بيسيب خشنوس خايم بيسيب خشنوس خايم. At this point, at this moment in time, as I'm about to recite Kaddish for the final time as an Avel, even though Avelis just ended a few hours ago, or yesterday, or today was the yard site, I wanted to share a moment to think about what Kaddish was for me, but really for all of us, to Mekadesh Shem Shamayim. I stopped saying Kaddish a month ago. I faced a void of emptiness. Halacha based on 11th month minhag demanded that I stop. I felt early on and certainly feel now that my dad's neshama is in a great place, closer with God. But my entire being and my neshama said I want to keep on going, reciting Kaddish. I was no longer mourning in the repetitive sense. My tears of mourning had slowly dried up and been replaced by loving memories that inspired me to celebrate and live a more full life. Kaddish for me was a yearning for a structured connection to spiritually talk to my father, as I had almost every day of his living life. Reciting uplifting words about God helped frame warm memories and dad's support. It wasn't a burden, but rather a bracha. It remained an opportunity that I was not able to continue. I thought of my dad almost every time that I said Kaddish, and I was enveloped in love as I chanted about sanctifying God's presence in the world, something I feel and believe Dad did with his hands and interactions with everyone. Oh sure, there's some very interesting moments for me to recite Kaddish, like being on top of the Baha'i Gardens in Haifa on a birthright trip and having 40 students join me in a teaching moment, or in Brussels on the day after a terrorist attack and having to talk my way through past 7 armed soldiers. But then the rabbi didn't show until the very end of Tefillah, and I missed the first Kaddish, but at least I caught the last one, as the rabbi was number 10. But alas, when I abruptly ceased, I felt empty. And like the man, I didn't bear this burden alone, but developed connections to other mourners who set the temple, an emotional pace of Kaddish within confines of an embracing community. I always reflected that we believe that every Avel is B'toch Shar, Tzion, Evle, Tzion, B'Yerushalayim, and welcoming in new Avelim in my shul to our Kaddish Zagers Club was a moment to share and reaffirm that each person brought his or her emotional pace and individual love, which collectively added a lot of warmth and comfort to me as well. But alas, like the modern tale of Joseph's coat, I started with words and I ended up, because of halachic mourning, and now at the end of 12-month period, I am simply left with a story. I have tried to fill this gap by being committed myself to remaining silent and hanging on to every Avel's other word. As Larry King said, I never learned anything while I was talking. So I spend my time now trying to listen to others now reciting Kaddish, and I latch on to their own words up to my Father in Shamayim. But that still, for me, is not enough. So I've been able to reflect upon these past few weeks of being silent. I had to shift from simply reciting words to internalization, and I realized that Kaddish is much more than simply letters that make up words. It's a call to action, to not just believe in Kiddush Hashem, as I believe my dad did on a daily basis through his honesty and in work and interactions with others, and not just reciting about a Kiddush Hashem in Kaddish, but I need to live Al Kiddush Hashem. I need to transfer my words to my feet, and incorporate Dad's lessons into my actions for a lifetime ahead, and not simply remember Dad during tefillah, but to remember Dad in every step of my life moving forward. Orechimim bevina b'smolo b'chavod Adonai od v'levitain Adonai yivared v'samo v'shalom Yisgadal Yisgadash Shmei Rabbah V'yamad v'hasid v'schadita L'chayam v'sial L'sachi yasom l'chayim olmo L'vivnei karta d'yishleim L'shach le'echal b'gav l'Amerika prachon n'uchra min Ara L'saba pachana d'Yishmaya L'asrei V'yamlich kut shabrichu machusei V'karei V'chayachon v'yamechon v'chayei d'chol beis Yisrael B'agalav izman kariv v'imru Amen. Amen. Yisbarach v'yishtabach v'yispar v'yisorvam v'yisnasei v'yisadar v'yisalev v'yisalal shmeit kudsha b'richu Leila min kol b'chasa v'shirasa tush b'chasa v'nechamasa Damiran be'alma v'iru Amen. Al Yisrael v'arabanan v'al tamideon v'al kol tamidei samideon v'al kol man dasvim b'reisa d'v'asra kadisha adain v'kol asar v'asar Yei lohon l'chon shlam rava china v'chista v'rachamim v'chayin arichim v'v'zneir v'chei v'kadam mikadam avahon d'mishmaya v'ara v'iru Amen. Yei shlam rava min shemaya v'chayim tovim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael v'iru Amen. Oseh shalom bimromav, u'yirachmav yoseh shalom aleinu, ve'al kol Yisrael v'imru Amen. Amen.
Our last speaker tonight will be, really doesn't need an introduction, but my father's partner of 50 years, my mother, in Israel. Share a few words about my father. I just few words, emphasizing the word few. A few words about. I just want to leave you with the realization as a child of my mother, and of course my father, that they had a unique marriage. Had a unique marriage. That was built on humor, as my brother and sister may have mentioned. They had an incredible sense of humor. And every day that I was saying Kaddish, not only Kaddish, but I was davening for the Yomad, you repeat Shmoneh Esrei, and I always had the words, Tolechenu kol miut la'artzenu. It always echoed in my head in English, right? Tolechenu kol miut la'artzenu. God will take us, kol miut la'artzenu. Kol miut, like erect, or standing up to our land. And many interpretations of that, but it always stuck in my head, my mother's sense of humor, as to how we actually got my father to Israel in the end of his life. My father, as you probably all know, was unfortunately in a coma the last 3 years, different stages of that, 2.5, 3.5. And unfortunately the last year of his life, he was in a very deep coma, and he was unfortunately supine, flat. And my mother had a vision, which was the correct vision, of course, that my parents wanted to live in Israel. They had made Aliyah, in fact. And my mother wanted my father to be in Israel with her. And he looked at my mom and said, Mom, Dad's kind of not really able to go to Israel. My mom was like, no, we're taking him to Israel. And Mom said, we're taking him to Israel the way I want to take him to Israel. So that's how we took him to Israel. We put him on a plane, on an El Al flight. And we stood him up, we took my father sitting in a business class seat, and I sat next to him along with someone else. We took him right to Israel, just like that. And I said, Mom, do you understand that Dad is basically in a coma right now? And she goes, yep, this is how your father would want to go to Israel. Going erect as he should. Not in a box, as Mom said, not in a box. So we took him not in a box, and we brought him that way, and he was able to spend the last year of his life in Israel. And it was a year and a half of his life in Israel. And it was a very unique experience. And that was my mom, and that was my dad. Mom?
All right, the reason we did the Kaddish first, so if anyone wants to leave, because I have a long speech. It is often expected for one half of a 50-plus year marriage to speak of her lost partner at such an occasion as tonight. All that has already been said reflects my feelings for my friend Neil. It is my desire to institute a maverick twist to this evening's Askara. As irreligious and irresponsible as I may be, without any dishonor to, irreverence for, and even, as I find it irrelevant, Utterances such as Tehillim, words of Torah, and the soon-to-be-said Kal Malay, while meaningful to most, do not achieve what I would like to present to you this evening. In my invitation weeks ago, I stated I wanted this memorial to be a reaffirmation of Neil's life. And so I collected very beautiful, from the heart, expressions of who Neil was by those who knew him well and loved him more. There were many essays sent in, and I apologize for not being able to share all, although I was excited to receive every one of them. They capture the essence of what kind of person Neil was, with all his wonders and warts. Last week in Askara for my friend Chani Zev, who I came to know late in life and little too brief, I heard a woman tell Yaakov how she wished she could share some of the humorous episodes of her friendship with Chani that evening.